Welcome back to our channel. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. The cold had settled deep into the bones, sharper and more biting than usual for late November. I woke slowly, the familiar ache in my joints greeting me like an old, unwanted friend. Over the years, that pain had grown into a constant companion, one I learned to live with but never liked. On mornings like this, Edith's absence felt especially heavy. She had this sixth sense for when I was hurting. Without me saying a word, she would quietly bring me a cup of hot tea, rich with ginger and honey, letting the steam warm my hands and the sweetness soothe my spirit. Now, in the stillness of the early morning, I lay staring up at the ceiling, the silence broken only by the ticking of the old clock from the living room. It had been 2 years and 3 months since I'd been left alone in this house. The home Edith and I had bought nearly 50 years ago when we first moved to Wallingford. It was where our only daughter, Beatrice, was born and raised. This house was more than wood and stone. It was a vault of memories, a keeper of every joy and sorrow we had ever known. Every crack in the plaster, every creaking floorboard, every corner held a story, whispered in the quiet moments when the world outside faded away. With a grunt, I pushed myself up from bed, wincing as my knees protested the movement. My morning routine was as unchanged as the seasons. Coffee brewed strong, toast crisped just right, and pills lined up neatly on the counter. The doctor had prescribed them to keep my blood pressure in check, but I doubted they made much difference anymore. At 78, the body just doesn't bounce back the way it used to. Peering out the kitchen window, I saw my small but tidy yard. The maple tree Edith and I had planted the year we married had dropped nearly all its leaves, now a bare silhouette against the gray sky. Luckily, I'd managed to rake them up before the frost, with a little help from Peter, a good-hearted neighbor boy. He'd earned $10 and a homemade pie baked from Edith's recipe, a recipe I clung to like a lifeline. Cooking had become my refuge after Edith was gone. I'd never spent time in the kitchen before. She never let me in. Now every new dish I learned felt like a small victory against the crushing loneliness. As I finished my coffee, my eyes drifted to the dresser where a picture of Beatrice stood. She was just 5 in that photo, grinning wide with the gaps where her front teeth used to be. I could almost hear her laughter, remember how she'd climb into my lap begging for another tale. About Princess Betty, a story I made up just for her. Where had that little girl gone? The last time I saw Beatrice was 6 months ago at her birthday. Todd, her husband, barely acknowledged me, giving only a curt nod, and the grandchildren, Abigail and Pierce, were glued to their phones all evening. Beatrice was polite but distant, as if inviting me was a duty, not a desire. The conversation was strained, and I left earlier than planned, exhausted and hurt. After Edith passed, everything changed. Her family home in Providence, inherited from her parents, had to be sold. We couldn't keep 2 houses and afford the taxes. Edith had kept that house for Beatrice, but when she married Todd, they bought their own bigger, newer place in Wallingford. The sale brought in a substantial sum, almost $350,000, money still sitting untouched in an account. I lived quietly on my pension and savings, hardly touching that money. But I knew Todd and Beatrice counted on it. Todd worked in insurance, but business hadn't been steady. They'd taken on a large mortgage and sent the kids to private schools. Beatrice hinted a few times about money troubles, but I pretended not to notice. That money was Edith's last gift, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Suddenly, the phone rang, the sound sharp in the quiet house. It was Beatrice, a rare call. Usually it was me who reached out. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice surprisingly warm. "How are you?" Slowly, I answered, "My knees ache a little, but that's normal." She didn't seem interested in my pain. "Thanksgiving's coming up. We're having a big dinner. Todd invited his co-workers and I invited some friends and their husbands. Why don't you come? The kids would love to see you." I hesitated, silent for a moment. Thanksgiving after Edith's death had been lonely. Last year, I ate a turkey from a restaurant with frozen mashed potatoes and a glass of bourbon. Not exactly a celebration. "Dad, are you there?" Beatrice asked, a hint of impatience in her voice. "Yes, I'm sorry. I've been thinking. I'll come. Thank you for the invitation." I heard the relief in her voice. "Great. Come by Thursday at 4. Dinner's at 6. After the call, I sat quietly, staring into nothingness. The invitation was unexpected. Maybe Beatrice wanted to mend our broken bond. We'd drifted apart over the years, especially after Edith died and I withdrew into myself. Or perhaps she was just embarrassed that her elderly father would be spending the holiday alone. Whatever the reason, hope bloomed inside me. Maybe not all was lost. I remembered Beatrice as a little girl running to greet me after work, how we built birdhouses for the backyard, how I taught her to ride a bike. But when she went to college, things changed. Edith got sick for the first time, and Beatrice became distant. Maybe it was too painful to watch her mother suffer. I never asked. Then came Todd, marriage, children, and fewer visits, colder, more formal meetings. The thought of a possible reconciliation filled me with a quiet joy. I decided to prepare for her visit. New clothes, gifts for the grandchildren, a haircut at Joe's barbershop down on Maple Street, the old place Edith and I once frequented. The next day, I braved the mall. Shopping was harder now. My legs tired quickly. The bright lights and noise made my head throb, but I was determined to find the perfect gifts. For Abigail, turning 15, a silver bracelet with a small book-shaped pendant. Beatrice once mentioned her love for reading. For Pierce, 13, a model airplane kit, the kind we used to build together before he grew distant. Maybe this would help us reconnect. In the men's clothing section, a woman around my age helped me pick out a sweater and pants. "This burgundy will bring out your eyes perfectly," she said, smiling. A smile that reminded me of Edith. I thanked her and hurried home, feeling a lump rise in my throat. At home, I wrapped the gifts carefully in festive paper adorned with turkeys and maple leaves. My fingers weren't as nimble as before, and it took longer than I wished, but the result was worth it. The bags looked warm and inviting. The week before Thanksgiving crawled by. I reread Edith's apple pie recipe, planning to bake it for the dinner. She had made it every year, and it was a family favorite. I hoped Beatrice would appreciate the gesture. The night before the visit, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, imagining warm embraces, grandchildren's smiles, even Todd's polite handshake. I dreamed of stories shared around the table, of board games played afterward, just like old times. On the morning of the visit, I woke early, took a long shower, shaved carefully, and put on my new clothes. Baking the pie, I measured every ingredient with the precision of a surgeon. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the house, stirring memories of holidays when Edith was alive and Beatrice was still a child eager for dessert. After wrapping the cooled pie, I loaded the gifts into the trunk of my old Chevy and set off. Beatrice's house was 30 minutes away, in a nicer neighborhood of Wallingford, a typical suburban home with a manicured lawn and two-car garage. Too big for just 4 people, if you asked me, but they always wanted to impress. As I drove, a 60s song played on the radio, and I found myself singing along quietly. It felt good, like feeling hope after a long winter. Parking outside my daughter's house, I took a deep breath. It's going to be okay, I told myself. Holding the pie and gift bags, I headed to the front door, praying this Thanksgiving would mark a new chapter for us. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. Beatrice stood there in an elegant navy dress, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. A smile curved her lips. but it didn't reach her eyes. "Daddy, you're here," she said, as if surprised I'd actually come. "Come in. Everyone's getting ready." I stepped inside, balancing the pie and bags awkwardly. Beatrice didn't offer to help. She just stepped aside. "I made apple pie," I said, hoping she'd show some warmth for her mother's recipe. "Mom's recipe?" "Oh," she said, taking the pie without much enthusiasm. "Thank you." "Leave your coat here," she said. The hallway looked different since my last visit. New furniture, a dark wood console with ornate legs, and a large mirror with a thick frame. It looked expensive. On the wall where family photos used to hang, there was now an abstract painting, in muted tones. "Did you renovate?" I asked, taking off my coat. "A little update," Beatrice shrugged. "Todd wanted the house to reflect his new position at work." She led me into the living room where several guests were already gathered. Todd was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, telling a man in a gray suit something. When he saw me, he stopped short. "Ah, Leslie," he nodded. "Glad you could make it." No hug, no handshake, just that condescending nod as if I were not his wife's father, but a distant acquaintance who'd been invited as a courtesy. "Hello, Todd," I said, trying to keep a positive attitude. "How's work going?" "Fine," he smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes, just like Beatrice's. "I've been promoted to regional manager. I now have 3 offices under me." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's quite an accomplishment." Todd looked at me with slight surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to appreciate the magnitude of his success. "Yes, that's right," he agreed and turned to his companion and continued. "This is Leslie, Beatrix's father. Leslie, this is Reed, my colleague." Reed shook my hand, politely inquired how I'd gotten here, and almost immediately returned to his conversation with Todd. I was left standing alone in the middle of the room, not knowing where to put myself. Beatrice had disappeared into the kitchen with my pie, and the grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. Looking around, I noticed that the living room, like the hallway, had undergone a makeover. A new leather sofa, a glass coffee table, a modern chandelier, hanging from the ceiling like a metal octopus. Everything screamed money and status. Mr. Hartwood. I heard a woman's voice and turned around. A young woman stood in front of me with a glass of wine. Her face looked vaguely familiar. "You don't remember me?" She smiled. "I'm Chloe, Beatrix's friend from high school. We met at your daughter's wedding." "Of course, Chloe," I lied, relieved that someone had decided to talk to me. "How are you?" We exchanged a few sentences about the weather and how Wallingford had changed over the years. Chloe was polite, but I felt that she was talking to me out of pity. Her gaze darted over my shoulder, searching for a more interesting interlocutor. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll look for my husband," she said at last, and slipped away, leaving me alone again. I decided to look for my grandchildren. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I heard muffled voices coming from Abigail's room. The door was ajar, and I peeked inside. Abigail was sitting at her computer, and Pierce was lying on her bed staring at his phone. They hadn't noticed my presence, and I could hear them talking. "Why did Mom even invite him over?" Pierce snorted. "He's always so weird and slow." "I have no idea," Abigail said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Dad said something about keeping family relationships together, especially now. Now, when they want to ask him for money," Pice chuckled and they both laughed. I felt the blood rush to my face. My own grandchildren talked about me like I was a burden, not a family member. And what was all this talk of money? Was the whole invitation just an excuse to get close to my savings? I wanted to turn around and walk away, get in my car and drive home, but something held me back. Maybe the hope that I was wrong in my suspicions, or just a reluctance to admit that my own daughter could be so calculating. I coughed, making my presence known. The grandchildren jumped up as if caught in the act. "Grandfather," Abigail exclaimed with feigned enthusiasm. "We didn't hear you come in." "Hi, guys," I said, trying to hide the pain in my voice. "I brought you guys something." I held out the gift bags to them. They took them with polite smiles, but without much interest. "Thank you, Grandpa," Pice mumbled, not even looking inside. "Yes, thank you," Abigail echoed. "We open them later." "Okay," I nodded, trying not to show disappointment. Once they'd been eager to tear open the wrapping, unable to wait to see what was inside. Now my gifts were just an obligation to be politely accepted. "Your mom said dinner would be at 6, I said, trying to keep the conversation going. "Do you know what she's cooking?" "Turkey, I guess." Pierce shrugged, already back on the phone. "The usual. She ordered everything from Wallingford Gourmet," Abigail added. "She didn't have time to cook for herself." I nodded, remembering how Edith always cooked Thanksgiving herself, spending the whole day in the kitchen. Beatrice had helped her, learning the secrets of making the perfect turkey and cranberry sauce. Apparently, those traditions didn't survive. "Well, I'm going downstairs," I said, realizing that my presence was only disturbing them. "I'll see you at dinner." They mumbled something in response, and I walked out, closing the door carefully behind me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling suddenly tired. This day was turning out to be nothing like I had imagined. Walking back downstairs, I noticed that there were more guests. Todd introduced me to a few more of his co-workers, but no one showed any desire to keep the conversation going beyond the bare minimum. I felt like a ghost, invisible to everyone present. Beatrice was fussing around the table, arranging the dishes and glasses. I approached, offering to help. "There's no need, Dad." She cut me off. "I can manage. Why don't you sit down? You must be tired from the road." I obediently sat down in a chair in the corner of the living room, watching the commotion around me. No one approached me. No one inquired about my life. No one asked me how I was doing on my own. I was like an invisible person, an old piece of furniture that had been moved to a corner so it wouldn't get in the way. After a while, Todd loudly announced that it was time for aperitif. He opened a bottle of champagne and began pouring it into glasses. "I'll pour you a whiskey, Leslie," he said, handing me a glass of the amber liquid. "I know you prefer it." I didn't remember ever telling him my preference, but I took the glass, thanking him. The whiskey was cheap with a pungent flavor, but I took a sip, not wanting to seem ungrateful. Todd raised his glass, drawing the guests' attention. "To Thanksgiving," he proclaimed, "to family and friends coming together." As they drank, Todd added a sip reminded of my presence, and of course, thanks to my father-in-law for coming. At his age, any trip is quite a feat. A few of the guests smiled politely in my direction, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Todd talked about me as if I were a decrepit old man, unable to get around on my own, not a man who still drove his own car and kept house. After the toast, the conversation flowed again without my participation. I sat sipping my whiskey and watching the guests. Among them were two couples about the same age as Beatrice and Todd, obviously their friends, who knew the family well. The others were Todd's co-workers, I gathered from scraps of conversation. Beatrice appeared from the kitchen, announcing that dinner was ready. Everyone headed for the table, and I rose following them. I was seated at the far end of the table next, to an older woman who was introduced as the aunt of one of Todd's co-workers. Apparently, I had been found company by age. The table was set beautifully, but without the love that Edith had put into every detail of the dinner. The turkey served on a silver platter looked flawless, too flawless to be home-cooked. Abigail's words that the meal had been ordered from a restaurant were confirmed. While Todd carved the turkey, I looked around the living room again. I noticed the new TV on the wall, a huge flat screen like a movie theater. On the mantelpiece were silver-framed photos, Todd and Beatrix at some reception, grandchildren in their school uniforms, a family portrait against the ocean. None of them had me or Edith in them. Beatrice was arranging the food on plates with the help of one of the guests. The grandchildren came down to the table, both with disgruntled faces, as if they had been torn away from something extremely important. They sat down next to each other, away from me. So Todd began loudly as everyone got their portions. Let's, as is tradition, say what we're thankful for this year. He started first thankful for his promotion, for his wonderful family, and for being able to gather all the dear ones around the same table. His words wrote like a speech at a corporate event. Beatrice thanked for stability and prosperity, for the health of the children, and for the opportunity to have guests in our home. Not a word about me. When it was my turn, I felt all, eyes drifting in my direction. Suddenly, my throat felt dry. I'm grateful for, I began, but my voice shook. I coughed and continued, for the invitation, for the opportunity to see my grandchildren grow up, and for the memory of Edith, who is always with us. At the mention of Edith's name, Beatrice looked away, and Todd gave a barely perceptible wuss. My late wife was not a welcome topic in this house. Dinner continued, and the conversation drifted back to the usual course. They discussed politics, the latest movies, plans for Christmas vacation. No one asked me anything, and I ate in silence, occasionally, glancing at the grandchildren who were texting under the table, thinking no one noticed. At one point, Todd started talking about his plans for next year. We're thinking about expanding the house, he said, turning to his co-workers. Add another wing, a home theater, maybe a pool in the backyard. Sounds great, Reed said, but it must be expensive. Todd glanced in my direction. We have some expectations for the future, he said, with a hint in his voice. Investments that should be about to pay off. I realized he was talking about my money and a piece of turkey stuck in my throat. I had to wash it down with water to keep from coughing. Beatrice, noticing my reaction, quickly changed the subject. Speaking of investments, she said, Pierce won the school's economics contest. You should tell everyone about your project, dear. Pierce reluctantly got off the phone and began to talk in a monotone about some kind of clean energy project. I tried to show interest by asking him about the details, but he answered in one word and returned to his narrative without looking at me. After dinner, Beatrice offered coffee to everyone. I volunteered to help, hoping to have a little private conversation with my daughter. Sit down, Daddy, she said. I'll manage. I stayed at the table feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Todd and his co-workers were discussing some kind of deal, and the women were talking about the upcoming holiday sales. The grandchildren asked permission to leave the table, and when they received it, immediately disappeared upstairs. As Beatrice brought in a tray of coffee, I noticed her whispering with Todd. They both glanced in my direction, and I thought I heard the word money. That made it even more uncomfortable. Dessert was served on small plates. Not my apple pie, but some kind of elaborate cake with many layers. My pie remained somewhere in the kitchen, forgotten and unwanted like myself. Looking at these people laughing and talking as if I weren't here. I tried to find the strength to believe that things could still get better, that maybe after the guests left, Beatrice and I could have a heart-to-heart talk, that I could find a way to reconnect with my grandchildren, that this was all just a misunderstanding, not a deliberate estrangement. But deep down inside, I knew I was fooling myself. The looks exchanged between Todd and Beatrice, the whispers, the condescension, all of it told me that I was here for one reason only, and that reason had little to do with family ties. As the evening wore on, I felt more and more out of place, by the minute. The coffee in my cup went cold, untouched. My apple pie was still not on the table, but everyone was enthusiastically devouring the expensive chocolate cake I had ordered from the pastry shop. Do you follow the stock market, Leslie? Suddenly, one of Todd's colleagues, whose name I couldn't remember, approached me. Not particularly, I answered honestly. At me age, the financial market seemed too unpredictable. Exactly, Todd said, loudly, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. That's exactly what I was talking about. Older people don't understand modern economics at all. He looked at me with that condescending smile I hated so much. No respect for risk, he continued. They keep their money under the mattress or at best in savings accounts with minimal interest. And then they wonder why their savings are disappearing before their eyes. Several of the guests nodded understandingly, and Beatrice gave me a look that was a strange mixture of irritation and embarrassment. I have no need to risk my money, I said calmly. I have enough of what I have. But you could increase your capital, Todd persisted. Imagine the inheritance you could leave to your grandchildren. There it is, a direct reference to my money and their future destiny. I looked at Beatrice, expecting her to stop this unpleasant conversation, but she merely adjusted, the napkin in her lap avoiding my gaze. I prefer to handle my own finances, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Of course you do, Todd laughed. It's just that it's hard to make rational decisions at your age. Statistics show that cognitive abilities begin to decline after 65. Several of the guests squirmed uncomfortably in their seats. Even for Todd, it was too rude. Todd, Beatrice said quietly, but it was as if he hadn't heard her. Take technology, for example, he continued. Leslie still uses a push-B-button phone. She refuses to learn the smartphone. It's a basic necessity in today's world. I have a smartphone, I countered. I just prefer not to use it unnecessarily. You see, Todd looked triumphantly at his colleagues. Typical resistance to progress, and then they complain that young people don't understand them. One of the guests laughed softly, and that was the signal for the others. Soon there was general laughter around the table, as if Todd had told a good joke rather than publicly humiliating me. Did you know that my father-in-law still reads paper? Newspapers? Todd continued, clearly getting into the swing of things. Every morning he waits for the mailman to bring him the news that's already out of date for the day. The laughter grew louder. I glanced at the grandchildren, hoping to see some sympathy, but Pierce was grinning, and Abigail was looking down at her plate, smiling slightly. He cooks the old-fashioned way too, Beatrice said, much to my disappointment. No modern kitchen gadgets, all by hand, like in the last century. Yeah, we've seen the result, Todd snorted, nodding toward the kitchen where my forgotten pie presumably lay. It looks like it was made in the Stone Age. A new burst of laughter. I sat there, feeling my cheeks burn with humiliation. Not because I was considered old-fashioned. There was no shame in that. But because my closest people had ridiculed me publicly as if I were not a family member, but a character in a joke. Have you heard him tell the same stories over and over again? Todd continued, imitating a shaky, senile voice. When I was young, we used to walk to school in the snow uphill both ways. Another explosion of laughter. I'd never said anything like that, but it didn't matter anymore. Todd was creating a caricature, and everyone was happy to play along. And that endless advice he gave, Pice joined in, suddenly deciding to participate. In my day, we respected our elders. I looked at my grandson with pain. He was 13, and he had already learned to despise me. What had I done to deserve this attitude? Had I simply lived too long? And the funny thing is, Todd said, taking a sip of wine, he still thinks he understands the modern world. The other day, he tried to explain to me how insurance works to me, to a man who's been in the industry for 20 years. Laughter again. I remembered that conversation. Todd had miscalculated the insurance premium for elderly clients, and I simply pointed out the error in the formula. He got angry, but admitted I was right. Now, the story had become a joke about my alleged incompetence. That's enough, I said quietly. But no one heard me. You know what the sad part is? Todd continued in a slightly drunken voice. He's sitting on a whole fortune and doesn't know what to do with it. $350,000 lying around while we try to make ends meet. There was a sudden silence. Even Todd seemed to realize he had gone too far. Beatrice looked at him with widened eyes, and the guests awkwardly averted their gazes. I slowly placed the napkin on the table. Everything was suddenly crystal clear. The invitation, the fake politeness, the humiliating spectacle. It was all about money. The money left over from the sale of Edith's house. Money they'd already mentally divided between them. "Leslie, Todd's just kidding," Beatrix said quickly, seeing the look on my face. "He didn't mean it." "No, that's exactly what he meant," I replied, surprised at the calmness in my voice. "That's exactly what he meant." I rose slowly from the table. All eyes were on me. Todd looked annoyed, like I was ruining the show. Beatrix looked scared, and the grandchildren looked confused. "You know," I began, addressing the crowd, "I thought inviting you to this dinner was an attempt to mend the relationship. I thought my daughter and her family really wanted me to be a part of their lives." I looked at Beatrice, and she lowered her eyes. "But now I see that the only thing you're interested in is the money you'll get when I die. Papa, that's not true," Beatrice began, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "There's no need," I said. "I understand, and I'll take appropriate action." Todd straightened, a weary expression on his face. "What do you mean?" he asked, and for the first time that evening, there was no condescension in his voice, only alarm. "I mean," I answered, feeling strangely light, "that I'm going to call my financial advisor tomorrow and have all my money transferred to a closed-end investment fund, a fund that only I would have access to." Todd's face palled. Beatrice looked at me with her mouth hanging open. "You can't," Todd began. "I can," I interrupted him. "It's my money, and now I can see your true intentions." There was complete silence. The guests froze, not knowing where to look. Todd and Beatrice exchanged panicked glances. Abigail and Pierce stared at their plates. "Leslie, let's not make any rash decisions," one of Todd's co-workers began, apparently trying to lighten the mood. "Todd just had a little too much wine. He didn't mean to offend you." "I'm not offended," I replied. "I just had an epiphany, and I'm grateful for it." I turned to Beatrice. "Thank you for dinner," I said formally. It was very informative. "Daddy, please," she began, but I was already heading for the exit. In the hallway, I took my coat off the rack. My hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear or anger, from determination. I felt as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. The weight of unfulfilled hopes of rebuilding a relationship with a family that saw me only as a source of money. I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Beatrice caught up with me at the door. "Daddy, you can't leave like this," she said, panic in her voice. "Todd didn't mean to hurt you. He was just making a bad joke." "It's not a joke, Beatrice," I said calmly. "It's the truth. The truth about how you feel about me and what you want from me." "But we're family," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Whether they were sincere or fake, I couldn't tell. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me today," I said. "Family doesn't ridicule or humiliate. A family doesn't wait for its relatives to die so it can inherit." She took a step back as if I'd hit her. "I never," she started. "You didn't stop him," I interrupted. "You laughed with everyone else. You let your children watch their father humiliate their grandfather. What does that say about you as a daughter, as a mother?" Beatrice lowered her eyes. Todd appeared behind her, his face filled with anger and alcohol. "You can't just disinherit us," he said, dropping any pretense of politeness. "It was Edith's money. It was for Beatrice and the children." "Edith wanted the money to go for the good of the family," I answered. "But you're not family. You're vultures circling a dying man, only I'm not dying yet, and I'm not going to let you get a dime." Todd's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "We can challenge any decision you make. You're an old man. You're out of your mind. Any court will recognize that. Try it, I replied calmly. I'd love to tell the judge about tonight. How my son-in-law publicly mocked my age and my alleged incompetence, and then openly declared that he was waiting for my money. Todd turned pale. Several guests appeared in the doorway of the living room, attracted by the commotion. They looked at us with unconcealed curiosity. There was a dead silence after my statement. I headed for the door, but Todd blocked my path. His face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. "Wait, Leslie," he said, trying to put a conciliatory tone in his voice. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. I was just making a bad joke." "It wasn't a joke," I replied calmly. "Jokes are funny. What you did was humiliating, and I'm not going to stand for it." Beatrice approached us, her face a mixture of fear and annoyance. "Dad, you're overreacting. Todd had too much wine. He didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me." I looked her right in the eye. "He made fun of me in front of all your guests, and you laughed with him. You all laughed." The hallway became crowded. The guests, attracted by the noise, crowded around the door, watching our conversation with unconcealed curiosity. Todd noticed them and turned to them with a strange smile. "Friends, a little family misunderstanding. Why don't you get back to dessert? We'll join you shortly." But no one moved from their seats. The situation was too intriguing to just walk away. "Leslie, be reasonable," Todd began again, lowering his voice. "Let's discuss this like adults. Money is an important issue, and it can't be handled emotionally." "That's why I'm going to call my financial advisor," I replied. "To resolve this issue without emotion, but with complete clarity about your true intentions." Todd cast a quick glance at Beatrice, as if looking to her for support. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling, "think of the grandchildren. We've always counted on that money for their education." "Really?" I looked at her in surprise, and I thought, "You were counting on that money for a home expansion and a home theater. Isn't that what Todd said?" Beatrice gave her husband an angry look, but quickly pulled herself together. "We care about the children's future," she said. "Good living conditions are part of their well-being." "What about taking care of me?" I asked. "About my well-being and dignity? About respecting the man who raised you and has always supported you?" She averted her eyes, unable to find something to say. Abigail and Pierce appeared from the living room, intrigued by the commotion. They stopped at the stairs, watching with an expression of confusion. "What's wrong?" Abigail asked. "Is Grandpa leaving?" "Yes, dear," I answered her. "Your grandfather is leaving, and I'm afraid he won't be coming back anytime soon." Because of Daddy's jokes, she threw a quick glance at Todd. He was just fooling around. "No, not because of the jokes," I said, looking at the grandchildren. "It was the lack of respect, because some people only see others as a source of money, not a person." Pierce shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "But you're not going to leave us without an inheritance, are you?" he asked, and almost laughed at the bluntness of it. "Pice!" Beatrice exclaimed. "You can't talk like that, but that's all you've been talking about these last weeks." He shrugged his shoulders about how Grandpa's money would help us pay off the mortgage and pay for my college. There was an awkward pause. Todd and Beatrice exchanged panicked glances. This house talk was obviously not meant for my ears. "So I said slowly, "So you were discussing my money, making plans in front of the kids. It's not what you think," Beatrice said quickly. "We were just—" "That's enough," I interrupted her. "I get it, and my decision won't change." I turned toward the door, but Todd was blocking my way again. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice now a blatant threat. "We're not done talking about this." "I am," he answered, looking him straight in the eye, "and I suggest you step aside." "Or what?" He grinned. "Call the police. Complain that we've hurt you." I felt anger rising inside me, but I held it back. Anger wouldn't help, right? "Now, you need a cool head." Not the police, I said calmly. My lawyer, who will be very interested to know that you're holding me against my will. Todd's face contorted, but he stepped aside. I opened the door, feeling the stares of everyone in the room. Dad, wait. Beatrice grabbed my arm. Let's talk, normally. Let's not get emotional. We can fix this. I looked at my daughter. There were tears in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were due to remorse or fear of losing the expected inheritance. We haven't had a normal conversation in years, I said. And today I realized why. We want different things, Beatrice. You want my money, and I want your respect. And neither of us seems to be getting what we want. It's not fair, she exclaimed. We're family. We care about you. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? I asked. When you inquired about my health? When you offered to help me without expecting anything in return? She was silent, her eyes downcast. Exactly, I said. Goodbye, Beatrice. I walked out onto the porch feeling the cold November air on my face. Behind me, Beatrice was yelling something, but I wasn't listening. I walked to my car, feeling strangely light. Grandpa, I heard Abigail's voice and turned around. She was standing on the porch wrapped in her sweater. Her parents' worried faces loomed behind her. Won't I see you again? She asked, and there was something like genuine sadness in her voice. It's not up to me, I answered. It depends on what you really want. I got in the car and started the engine. In the rear-view mirror, I could see Todd dragging Abigail back into the house, and Beatrix standing on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. As I drove away, I didn't feel an ounce of regret, only relief, as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. When I returned home, the first thing I did was to gather up the things I had left at Beatrix's house. My nightgown, my toothbrush, the book I planned to read before bed. I always stayed the night after Thanksgiving, and I planned to stay this time too. How naive of me to think that this holiday would be the beginning of reconciliation. After putting my things in a small bag, I sat in my chair looking at my phone. It was silent. Neither Beatrice nor Todd had tried to contact me. Apparently, they had decided to give me time to cool down and come to me senses. They didn't realize that my decision was final. In the morning, I woke up with a clear head and a firm intention. After eating breakfast, I pulled out the business card of Harris Williams, a financial advisor, and dialed his number. Harris Williams speaking, came a businesslike voice. Mr. Williams, this is Leslie Hartwood. We met at George Patterson's funeral. Of course, Mr. Hartwood, he said with a warm note in his voice. What can I do for you? I need advice on an investment fund, I said. Closed and restricted access. I understand, he said. When would it be convenient for you to meet? We agreed to meet the next day. I hung up the phone with a sense of accomplishment. Now, I just had to wait for Beatrix and Todd's reaction, which I was sure would not be long in coming. Indeed, around noon, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood Beatrice, alone without Todd. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. May I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch, nervously rubbing the strap of her purse. Dad, I came to apologize, she began. What happened yesterday? It was awful. Todd was out of line. Were you? I asked. You didn't cross any boundaries laughing with him. She lowered her eyes. It was my fault, she admitted. I shouldn't have supported him. But you know, Todd, when he starts, he's hard to stop. I know, I nodded. And that's why I don't understand how you could marry a man like that. Beatrice flinched as if I'd hit her. He wasn't always like that, she said. He's just been going through a rough patch at work. He's worried about our financial situation, so much so that he's willing to humiliate your father for money. It's not just about money, she said quickly. We're worried about your future, about how you're doing on your own. Don't lie to me, Beatrice, I said tiredly. Not after yesterday. You're only interested in money. Pice confirmed it himself. He's a child. He doesn't understand, she objected. Of course, we discussed finances. We're having trouble with their mortgage and the children's education is expensive, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Love is shown in actions, I said, and your actions show only greed and disrespect. Beatrix took a deep breath as if gathering her strength. All right, she said. Let's be honest. Yes, we need the money. Yes, we were counting on your help. But that doesn't change the fact that we're family, that we have a history, a connection. What kind of connection? I asked. We see each other once every 6 months, and that's on an obligation. You don't call. You're not interested in my life. My grandchildren treat me like an outsider. What kind of family is that? She was silent, unable to find anything to object. Listen, I continued more gently. I understand that you have financial difficulties, but it's not my job to solve those difficulties, especially when you treat me like you did yesterday. We can fix this, she said with sudden energy. Socialize more, see each other more often. The kids can spend weekends with you. So I don't disinherit you, I asked bluntly. Beatrice blushed but didn't look away. That's important too, she admitted. I won't lie, but not only that. I shook my head, feeling endlessly tired of this conversation. You know what the problem is, Beatrice? You view me as an ATM, not as a person. You're not interested in me, my life, my feelings. You're waiting for me to die so you can have my money. That's not true, she exclaimed. It's not. I looked her straight in the eye. Then why was Todd talking? About my money as dead weight? Why were you discussing how you were going to spend it like I was already in the grave? She couldn't come up with an answer. I called a financial advisor, I said. I'm meeting with him tomorrow to arrange a transfer to a closed-end investment fund. Beatrix's face contorted with panic. Dad, please don't do this. Let's talk this through. We can come to a compromise. It's too late for compromise, I said. Yesterday, you showed your true colors and I've made my decision. At that moment, the door swung open and Todd burst into the house. His face was red with anger. Enough of these games, Leslie, he said, not bothering to say hello. You can't just disinherit us. It's Edith's money and it was meant for her daughter and grandchildren. Todd, Beatrice exclaimed. We agreed that I would talk to Dad alone. Did you convince him? Todd snorted. From the look on your face, no. It's time to stop beating around the bush and say it straight. That money has to stay in the family. It will stay in the family, I said calmly. With me. I'm still alive, remember? But you're an old man, Todd exclaimed. What will you do with such a sum? You only need the bare minimum to live on. The rest should. Go to someone who can make good use of it. Good use, I chuckled. Like a home theater and an expansion of the house. That's a real estate investment, Todd snapped. They'll increase the value of the house. It's a wise investment. Yeah, I nodded. I prefer to invest in my life. Comfort and independence for the rest of my years. You're selfish, Todd said. You think only of yourself, not of your grandchildren's future. And you're a hypocrite, I replied. You think only of the money and not of the person to whom it belongs. Beatrice stepped between us, clearly afraid that the conflict would escalate into something more serious. Enough, both of you, she said. We're not going to get anywhere this way. Todd glared at her angrily, but took a step back. Leslie, he began, trying to speak more calmly. Let's be reasonable. This money could secure your grandchildren's future. Isn't that what Edith would have wanted? At the mention of Edith's name, I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Don't you dare mention her name, I said quietly but firmly. You have no right to talk about what she would have wanted. You didn't even really know her. Dad, Beatrice intervened. Mom would want us to be a family, to support each other. Exactly, I said. But we're not a family. You proved that yesterday, and now I accept it as fact and act accordingly. You can't just hand over all the money, Todd said. We can appeal the decision, claim that you're incompetent. Try it, I said calmly. Any doctor will say I'm sane, and any judge will see that you're just greedy people trying to take property from an elderly man. Todd clenched his fists, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. But Beatrice put her hand on his shoulder, holding him back. Come on, Todd, she said. It's no use. No, he shook off her hand. I'm not leaving until he promises to keep the money in the family. I think you'd better leave, I said, rising from my chair. Or I'll call the police. You're bluffing, Todd grinned. You wouldn't call the police on your own daughter. I silently pulled out my cell phone and started dialing. Todd watched me in disbelief, but when I put the phone to my ear, his face changed. Okay, he said, backing toward the door. We'll leave, but this isn't over, Leslie. You'll regret your decision. The only thing I regret, I replied, is not seeing your true nature sooner. Beatrice gave me one last pleading look, but I was adamant. They walked out, slamming the door loudly. I sank into the chair, feeling my hands shaking, not from fear, but from tension and determination. The phone in my hand rang, making me flinch. It was Harris Williams. Mr. Hartwood, I got off early. We can meet today if it's convenient for you. Perfect, I replied. The sooner the better. After packing, I got into my car and drove to Williams' office. On the way, I thought about life, about the decisions that had brought me to this point, about my marriage to Edith, the birth of Beatrice, the joys and difficulties of raising a daughter, how everything changed after Edith's death, how I'd allowed myself to become invisible in the lives of my own family. But things will be different now. I will no longer live my life expecting crumbs of attention from people who only see me as a source of money. I'm going to start living for myself to manage my time and money as I see fit. And that thought filled me not with bitterness, but with a wonderful sense of freedom and determination. The meeting with Harris Williams was quick and efficient. He was exactly the kind of professional I expected to see, businesslike, competent, no questions asked. I outlined my situation as specifically as possible. I wanted to transfer all of my money from the sale of Edith's house into a closed investment fund to which only I would have access. I understand, Mr. Hartwood. Williams nodded, making notes in his notebook. I can suggest several options that meet your requirements. We discussed possible investment strategies, the degree of risk, potential returns. In the end, I chose a conservative option that would provide me with a stable income in the coming years without unnecessary risks. Excellent choice, Williams approved. I will prepare all the necessary documents by the end of the week, but we can start the transfer process today if you are sure of your decision. I'm absolutely sure, I replied. The sooner the better. That same day, I signed the preliminary documents, and the process was set in motion. Williams assured me that in a week, everything would be formalized and I would have full control over my investment. When I returned home, I felt an extraordinary sense of relief, as if I had shed a heavy weight I had been carrying for years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny, not a passive observer waiting for attention from my own family. The phone rang several times. Beatrice was trying to reach me, but I didn't answer. I needed time to process what had happened and decide how to move on. The next morning, I woke up with a clear understanding of what I wanted to change in my life. For years, I had existed waiting for my relationship with my daughter and grandchildren to work itself out. I had given up my desires, my interests, my friendships, all for the illusion of family ties. It was time to return to the real me. The first thing I did was call Robert King, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. We had once been inseparable, working together at a construction company, spending weekends together, fishing, going to baseball games. But after Beatrice started insinuating that Robert was a bad influence on me, it gradually cut back on contact with him, hoping to earn my daughter's approval. Leslie. Robert's surprised voice on the phone warmed my soul. "Is that you, old bugger?" "I am Bob," I answered, smiling. "How are you?" We talked for almost an hour. Robert talked about his life, about his grandchildren, who, unlike mine, visit him regularly, about fishing, which he still enjoys, despite his arthritis. "Listen," I said as the conversation came to an end, "how would you like to go fishing this weekend? Just like old times." "Hell yes, of course I do," Robert exclaimed. "I thought you'd never suggest it." Having agreed on the details, I hung up the phone with a sense of anticipation. Fishing, the kind of simple joy I'd deprived myself of for years for fear of disappointing Beatrice. The next item on my getting back to life list was home remodeling. For years, I had put it off, saving every penny as if my grandchildren's lives depended on it. Now that I had decided to manage my money on my own, it was time to make my home truly comfortable. I called in a repair crew who could start work as early as next week. We discussed replacing the leaky roof, installing a new heating boiler, and renovating the bathroom. All things I'd been putting off for years, afraid of wasting the family money. "Would you like to renovate the kitchen too, Mr. Hartwood?" the gay foreman asked, looking at my old kitchen set. I wondered. Edith had loved this kitchen, had chosen every cabinet, every knob, but it had been years and everything looked worn, outdated. "Yes," I said firmly. "Completely renovate the kitchen, but keep this cupboard." I pointed to the antique oak cupboard Edith had inherited from her mother. "It stays." The foreman nodded understandingly and made a note in his clipboard. When the repairman left, leaving me with the estimate and the contract, I sat down at the computer. It was time to do another long-postponed thing, to sign up for a local hobby club. For several years, I'd been looking at the ads for jazz meetings at the Wallingford Cultural Center, but I'd been hesitant to go, partly because of busy family matters, partly out of fear of starting something new at that age. But now that I had decided to live for myself, it was the right time to give it a try. I found the club's website and sent an application to attend the next meeting. The reply came surprisingly quickly. I was invited to a meeting the following Wednesday. The phone rang again. "Beatrice." This time I decided to answer it. I had to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. "Yes, Beatrice," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Daddy, at last." I could hear the relief in her voice. "I've been calling you all day. Todd and I were so worried." "Really?" I couldn't hide my skepticism. "I thought you were only worried about my money." "Daddy, please," she said, a pleading tone in her voice. "Let's not go through this again. We talked to Todd and he realized he was wrong. He wants to apologize in person." "I don't think that's necessary," I replied. "I've already made a decision about my finances and I'm not going to change it." "But Dad," she hesitated, "we're a family. We shouldn't let money come between us." "It's interesting that you didn't bring up family until after I decided to put my money in a closed-end fund," I said. "Before that, I didn't see much desire to maintain family relations." "That's not fair," she exclaimed. "I've always taken care of you. We invited you to holidays. We called you." "You invited me out of duty, not love," I interrupted her. "Called once a month to make sure I was still alive and that the money wasn't gone." "That's not caring, Beatrice. It's a calculation." She was silent and I could hear her heavy breathing. "What do you want from us?" she finally asked. "Do you want us to come every weekend for the kids to spend more time with you? We can organize all that. See, that's the problem." I sighed. "You see, communicating with me as an obligation that needs to be organized, like a deal, your attention in exchange for my money. No, that's not what I meant. That's exactly what I meant," I said firmly. And you know what? I don't need this kind of relationship anymore. I deserve better. Daddy, please. Tears came into her voice. Don't push us away. We can fix this. I'm not pushing you away, I said softer. I'm just stopping clinging to the illusion. If you or the kids ever want to see me without any financial motive, my door is always open. But I won't play your games anymore. Is that a final decision? She asked after a pause. Yes, I replied. I've already arranged the transfer of money and started a new life. A weekend of fishing with Robert was exactly what I needed. We drove out early in the morning to a lake 20 minutes outside of town, bringing tackle, a thermos of coffee and sandwiches I'd made from an old recipe. Damn it, Leslie, you haven't lost your cooking skills, Robert exclaimed, taking a big bite of the roast beef sandwich. Edith would be proud. She'd say I put too much mustard on it, I grinned. And she'd be right, Robert laughed. But that's what makes them Sodom tasty. On Wednesday, I attended the jazz club for the first time. The meeting was held in a small room at the Wallingford Cultural Center. About 20 people of all ages gathered to listen to rare recordings and discuss the work of Duke Ellington. Newcomer? A gray-haired woman with bright blue eyes asked me as I hesitantly stopped at the entrance. Yeah, first time here, I admitted. Then come sit next to me. She patted the chair next to her. I'm Eleanor, former music teacher, current fan of all things jazz. The evening was surprisingly interesting. I learned a lot about music I've always loved but never studied in depth. After the main part of the meeting, several people, including Eleanor, invited me for coffee at a nearby cafe. A week later, Beatrice and Todd showed up on my doorstep unannounced. I had just returned from Robert's where we had discussed an upcoming trip to Vermont. We wanted to talk, Beatrice said, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. You're not answering. Your cell phone. Come in. I stepped aside to let them in. I'm listening. Todd looked unusually shy, avoiding my eyes. Beatrice, on the other hand, was collected and determined. Daddy, we've thought a lot about what happened, she began, and we admit we were wrong. Todd shouldn't have talked about you like that at dinner. I shouldn't have laughed. We're both sorry. I sincerely apologize, Leslie, Todd said, and to my surprise, there was sincerity in his voice. My behavior was inexcusable. I looked at them carefully, trying to figure out what was behind it. Had they really realized their wrongdoing, or was this another attempt at manipulation? I appreciate. Your apology, I finally said, but what's next? What's going to change? Beatrix sighed. We want a relationship, she said. A real relationship without ulterior motives. AI realized I'd lost my father by focusing on the money instead of the man. And how do you envision that? I asked, still remaining skeptical. We don't know, Beatrice admitted honestly. But we want to try. Maybe we could start with weekly dinners. No talk-off money, inheritance, investments, just family get-togethers. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to believe them, to give them another chance. The other part reminded me of years of neglect and manipulation. I'm willing to give it a try, I finally said, but on my terms. No pressure, no financial talk, and I won't change my mind about the foundation. We understand? Beatrix nodded. It's your money, and you have the right to use it as you see fit. I don't know how sincere their words were, but I decided to give them a chance. Not for their sake, but for my own sake. Not to live with bitterness and resentment, to keep some connection with my grandchildren. But at the same time, I firmly knew that I would not let them manipulate me anymore. I would continue to live my life, going to the jazz club, hanging out with Robert and new friends, traveling, enjoying my renovated home. I would be open to a real relationship, but I would not sacrifice my happiness and dignity for the illusion of family bonds. And this decision brought me peace and confidence. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, free from having to conform to other people's expectations, free to live the way I want to live and be who I want to be. And that freedom was worth all the money in the world.